lot of changes to my photography over the last couple of weeks. A lot of new things and a lot of new things that I haven't really used that much in the past. So I'm changing film. So I'm going to test out some Pan F film. I haven't shot a lot of this over the years. It's ISO 50, made by Ilford. ISO 50 wasn't really that common for a sports photographer to shoot that type of a film, and certainly wasn't common at a newspaper, which is where my background comes from. So I'm going to try this Ilford Pan F film. I've got a new camera system. I've talked about that. And I've got a new developer. So it's a good time to test things and make sure that they're working as they should. Now, the first thing I want to know is what is the box speed of the film and what is the shooting speed that I'm going to use, the ISO for this Pan F film. So the box speed is easy. It's Pan F 50, so ISO 50. And box speed is could be 50. They say it's 50, but it's kind of like when you buy a new car and they say it gets 50 miles to the gallon, and then in your personal experience, it didn't get 50 miles to the gallon, it got 40 miles or whatever. So in a lab, in a perfect situation, yes, in a lab, in a perfect situation, the box speed would be 50. But I'm not in a lab, I'm in the world, so I'm going to test it. And this test really has two components. Figure out the speed of the film and figure out the development time. And those are two different things, and I'll kind of get to that. Now, part of the question is, how do you do it? But more importantly is, why do you do it? And I talked with some of my friends, and I posted a couple of things on different forums, and everybody's like, don't bother, just cut it in half and, correct it in the darkroom, correct it when you're printing, use multi-grade paper. And if it's too contrasty, just dial it down. If it's too flat, just dial it up. So that's okay. That's a great solution for a lot of people. But I really want to know what I'm doing. I want to understand it. And so I'm going to just run a couple of quick tests. It take me, a couple of rolls. And the first test is the ISO. Now, my new camera, doesn't have a meter through the lens. So I've got to use a handheld meter. And I want to talk for a minute. This is not about meters, but you have to understand a bit about meters. So this is an incident meter. It reads flash and it reads ambient light, right? You set the ISO, you set the shutter speed, you press the button, and it says, F1, because it's not that bright in here. So this is an ambient and flash reading light meter. Now, the way I have it set up here, it's incident, the light that is coming to the subject. And when I do my cowboy portraits, I go right up by their face and I take a meter reading, and that's what I put on my camera. So it's the light hitting their face that I'm measuring, the incident light. Now with this meter, I can turn this little dial, and some people actually change this dome and put a flat, replace it with a flat piece. I don't think I have that. But now this very same meter is reflective. So it's not the light hitting my face, it's a measurement of the light leaving my face. So I would put it up to the person's skin if I was exposing their skin, and then take a reading. Now in theory, and the theory never works out, in theory those readings would be the same. But I just want to point out, this is reflective, the light reflecting off of me, and this is incident, the light hitting the subject. Now, this meter is not that smart. It's not as smart as my Sony camera that I'm recording this on, because the Sony camera not only reads the tone and the brightness, it reads the color. So it knows, hey, there's red in the picture, there's blue, there's green, whatever. It knows all that. These meters, these computers were much more simple, and they just measured the tone. Now, what tone, what were they based on? Well, you've probably heard about it. 18% gray. This is a gray card, so it might not be totally accurate because it's 40 years old and maybe it's faded, but it's gray. Not just gray, it's perfectly gray. It's exactly halfway between pure white and pure black. Now, pure black doesn't really exist in a sense, because pure black is the absence of light? That's a tricky kind of question to answer. But 18% gray is the gray card, and that's what I'm holding right here. And the meter is calibrated to make everything 18% gray. That's what it does. That's all it does. Whether it's flash or ambient light, it's going to make it 18% gray. So if I had a white shirt on and I metered the light coming off of my white shirt, in the photo, it would be 18% gray. It wouldn't be white, it'd be 18% gray. And if I wore a dark shirt, in the photo, when I metered it, it would make this black. Now this isn't pure black, this is dark gray technically. I mean, it looks black, but it's not the absence of light. It's just dark. So the meter would think of this as 18% gray and give you exposure as if that was 18% gray. Now, with the incident reading, it doesn't care what I'm wearing, it's just measuring the light. So that's a much simpler way to do it. All of this needs to be refined. All of this, you need to play around with it a little bit. You need to learn it a little bit. Now, I would say that what I'm doing is a little bit for the more advanced photographer. If you've just shot 2 rolls of black and white in your life, or you're a digital kid or a digital guy, and now you got a film camera, you bought a K1000, or maybe you took my advice and bought a Nikon F3, or maybe you bought my Leica off of eBay, whatever, you're just starting out. This might be a little more advanced than you want to go, but it might be interesting for you to understand some of the concepts. So, as I said, the meter incident is the light hitting my face, reflective is the light coming off my face. And that is a general meter. Now this is a spot meter. This works with ambient light and flash. This is one of the great tools that photographers used for so long. So this is a spot meter. Instead of kind of measuring a generic area, it measures just a dot. So if you look up in the sky at night and you see the moon, that's I could take a reading just off the moon. Now, if I pointed my camera at the moon, all of that sky is confusing the meter and confusing the camera. But with a spot meter, I could just meter the moon. Now, what would it make it? It would make it 18% gray. It would make the white moon gray. So it might not be what you want, but at least it's consistent. And this is a spot meter that measures 1 degree, so I have to point it at my scene at something very specific, because whatever I'm pointing it at, it's going to make that 18% gray. And so if I'm putting it at a black hole, now my meter reading is going to be twisted, wrong, because that black hole is going to be 18% gray. If I pointed it at a white sail on a boat, again, it's going to make that white sail gray, and I need to compensate that exposure. But the key with this is to understand that it is very specific and a very small area. Now, if it wasn't raining, I would go outside and shoot my test roll right now. But there's just 1 or 2 other things I want to talk about before we get carried away. Now, of course, this is a moleskin book. You don't buy a moleskin; they're overpriced. But I got a deal on a package of them, or maybe I took it when I worked at Sony. But anyways, I've got some of these moleskin books. So this is kind of the size you want. It could even be a little bit smaller. You're going to need to carry this in your camera bags, basically for the rest of your life, because you're going to make notes, and then you're going to want to refer back to them. What was the meter reading off of a full moon? What was the filter compensation that I used in this photo? So you're going to want to get a book that you can write notes down. I've been using, instead of a book, I've been using a video on my phone, and it hasn't really worked out as well as you might think, because you can never find the file later on. But anyways, get yourself a moleskin book, get yourself a good pen. You don't really need a gray card, but it's interesting to know that the meter is measuring from the gray card. Now, you don't need a spot meter. You've probably got one in almost every modern camera. Has matrix metering, center weighted metering, and spot metering. So that's all this is doing. This is just giving me a spot meter because, as I said, my new camera system doesn't have a built-in meter. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go outside on a nice sunny day. and I'm going to put a cloth in the shade. No direct sun on it. Now the cloth could be any color. Mine happens to be gray, but that is not necessary for this exercise. I happen to weirdly, because I'm a photographer, a career photographer, I have a gray card. I have a gray background, exactly 18% gray. So I'm just going to take a piece of that cloth and I'm going to take it outside. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set the ISO, the ASA, the film speed to the box speed. So I'm going to call it ISO 50. All right. Now I'm going to take a meter reading of this cloth. Again, the cloth could be any tone. Doesn't have to be gray. Doesn't have to be 18% gray. Could be whitish. Could be blackish. Doesn't matter. When I meter it, it's now going to be 18% gray. The meter is going to read it and say, hey, that's 18% gray. If I use that exposure, it'll be 18% gray. So that's good to know. Here's the first shot I'm going to do. I'm going to take a picture of the exposure that it gives me of this piece of cloth in the shade. Now it's key when you do this that the sun isn't coming in and out. You need consistent light on this it's going to take 10 minutes probably. So for 10 minutes, you need full shade, no clouds, consistent light. I'm going to take a reading of that cloth, whatever it gives me, 1 second at f11. Let's say that's what the meter gives me. I'm going to fire one frame. So the roll has 12 shots on it. It's this pan F at ISO 50. So I'm going to shoot one frame of the gray card. Okay, I'm never going to print that picture. Then I'm going to put my lens cap on the lens and I'm going to take a second photo. Now in theory, and it will work out, this will be a totally blank frame. Okay, I'm going to get to that in a minute. And then I'm going to take the lens cap off and do another one at gray card, of the gray card at whatever shutter speed it told me to shoot at. So I've got a gray card, a totally blank frame, that's the one I need, and another one. So I've just sandwiched it so when I process it, it's going to be easy to identify which one is that's blank. Now the blank is important because it's base fog plus development. So the film itself, when you look at a roll of processed film, it's not clear. It's almost clear, but it has a bit of inherent base fog. That's the amount of density to the image when there's no image. It's the clearness of the film, and it picks up a bit of stain from the developer no matter what you do, and that's the base fog. So this first frame, gray card, second frame with the cap on is just base fog. Hard to get your head around maybe. And then another frame of the gray card, just so that I can easily look at the roll and say, okay, that's the roll, that's the shot that is base plus fog. Now, when I print, I'm going to print that. That's an important frame, but that's not, I've got to finish off the roll first. So I'm going to go back to my meter and I'm going to meter and it's going to say gray. You're going to make it gray. And then I'm going to take whatever that reading is, I'm going to underexpose it by 4 stops. So if it was, 1 second at f11, I'm going to just underexpose it, f16, f22, f32, f45. Underexpose it by 4 stops. So that's the key. Now, that I'm going to shoot 2 frames of. Underexposed by 4 stops. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up 1/3 of a stop. And I'm going to fire that frame. And then I'm going to open up 1/3 of a stop. I'm going to fire that frame. And then I'm going to open up 1/3 of a stop. And I'm going to continue for maybe 4 or 5 shots. So I'm getting a little more exposure, exactly 1/3, a little more exposure on every frame. So when I process it, and we'll get to that, when I process it and then develop it, it will show me what I need, what I'm trying to learn. Because I'm basing everything on that base fog, but I don't want base fog, I want a bit of an image. So we're going to learn from the base fog, and then we're going to figure out the exact the exact user speed of the film. It's different for everybody. It's not too different. Like if this is ISO 50 and I end up with ISO 25, can't be too different from you. You're not going to get 200 or you're not going to get 8. It's going to be consistent in there in the ballpark. But in theory, it's a little bit different for everybody because of how they process their film, how they shoot their film, their lenses, their darkroom, their enlarger. It's all a little bit different. So we're going to figure out the true film speed for this Pan-F. And then after I've done that, I'm going to do it for Delta 100. And I've just arrived today is some of that Rollei infrared 400, so I'm going to figure out the exact shooting speed for that, and we'll be off to the races. So I've got my film and I'm down on the darkroom. Now I'm going to process this film. So there's basically two different methods that you can use. You can use the Kodak method or the Ilford method. So the Kodak method works like this. Let's say your development time at 20 degrees Celsius, so 68 Fahrenheit. Let's say it's 10 minutes. So you pour the chemistry in, you start the clock, and you agitate for the first 30 seconds. Then after 30 seconds, you tap it a few times just to get any bubbles out. Now, every 30 seconds, you're going to agitate it twice, which should take about 5 seconds. And you do that for the whole development time. So that's the Kodak method. So the Ilford method is a little bit different. I just found out about it this year. With the Ilford method, you pour the chemistry in, you start the clock, and you agitate 4 times, which should take about 10 seconds. And then every minute you agitate 4 times for about 10 seconds. So Kodak method is every half minute for 5 seconds. The Ilford method is every 1 minute for 10 seconds. So a little bit different. It doesn't matter which method you use. What matters is that you're consistent. Always do it the same. That's the key with all of the darkroom stuff, consistency. Now, what I've done is I processed the film, and as you can see, I've got this frame, got a frame with no image on it between 2 pictures of the gray card. And I'm going to take that blank frame, that's my base plus fog, and I'm going to make a test strip of that. So now I haven't made a test strip in years. I couldn't even remember how to do it. I had to kind of do it a few times. It took me 4 times to make a test strip, which is supposed to save you paper and time. Anyways, so I used 3-second wedges, and I did 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 9 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds, 18 seconds. I'm trying to get full darkness with the minimal amount of exposure. So that worked out to be around 15 seconds. So 15 seconds is what I've done, what I'm using. So I've got the enlarger set at a certain setting. This will give me, on a square negative, a full frame 8x10. I'll get the full square image on an 8x10. Now I need to remember this enlarger height because I'm going to come back to it down the road on other days. And I've set the contrast to grade 3. So I'm using Ilford multi-contrast paper and grade 3 in this case. So I'm looking for the minimal amount of time that I can use to get full black. And that's what I've got here. So 15 seconds. Now I swap that negative out and I put in the negative that is ISO 50 on the Pan-F. So this is my full box speed. And I make a print of that, and it's just as black basically as the base fog. And now I go to the next frame, and keeping my exposure time consistent at 15 seconds and my enlarger height the same, I make a print of the box speed, and then I make a print of the exposure on the negative where it was 1/3 of a stop over, and then another 1/3 of a stop, and then plus another 1/3 of a stop, really one full stop at this point, and then another 1/3 of a stop. So I look at these images and I say, where am I getting enough difference from full black to a dark gray, almost black? I want a bit of detail in the black, just a bit, just a hair of detail. So it's a bit of a judgment call. And as you look at these, so I did it with the Pan-F film, and I did it with the Delta 100 film. Now with the Pan F film, if I stop down 4 stops, now if you stop down 5 stops, it's basically just black. But at 4 stops, at the right film speed, I should get a perfect amount of detail, just a slight hair of detail in those blacks. So as I look at this, if I go box speed, so box speed 50, it's basically black. If I open up a third of a stop, it's basically black. There's a little bit of a difference. If I go another third of a stop, I am now satisfied that there is enough separation, enough difference between full black and what I've got here. So I want a little bit of detail in those blacks. It's a bit of a judgment call. So I'm going to say with Pan F, it's ISO 50. I'm going to say it's 2/3 of a stop that I need to open up to get my true film speed for my developer time, my enlarger, everything. So instead of being ISO 50, I'm going to shoot that at ISO 32. That's my starting point with Pan F. And I did the same thing with Delta 100, and it's about the same thing. So Delta 100, instead of being 100, I'm going to shoot it at 64. So those are my film speeds. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out the development time, which is very critical if you want consistency.